now. And instead of treating yourself with respect, you have entrusted your own happiness unto the souls of others. Unto the souls of others. Do external things distract you? Then make time to learn something worthwhile. Stop letting yourself be pulled in all directions, but make sure you guard against the other kind of confusion. People who labor all their lives but have no purpose to direct. Even when hard at work, ignoring what goes on in other people's souls. No one ever came to grief that way. But if you won't keep track of what your own soul's doing, how can you not be unhappy? Don't ever forget these things, the nature of the world, my nature, how I relate unto the world, what proportion of it I make up, that you are part of nature, and no one can prevent you from speaking and acting in harmony with it. Always. Yeah, keep on degrading yourself. So soon your chance at dignity, it will be gone. Everybody gets one life. Yours is almost all used up now. And instead of treating yourself with respect, you have entrusted your own happiness unto the souls of others. Unto the souls of others. I concentrate every minute like a Roman, like a man. And unfreeing yourself from all other distractions. Yes, you can, if you do everything as if it was the last thing you were doing in your life. And stop being aimless. Stop letting your emotions override what your mind knows. Stop being hypocritical, self-centered, irritable. You see how few things you have to do to manage this. That's all even the gods can ask of you. Yeah, keep on degrading yourself. So soon your chance at dignity, it will be gone. Everybody gets one life. Yours is almost all used up now. And instead of treating yourself with respect, you have entrusted your own happiness unto the souls of others. Unto the souls of others. Do external things distract you? Then make time to learn something worthwhile. Stop letting yourself be pulled in all directions.
You see the
But
private
make sure
chat
you
on
guard
the
against the other kind of confusion. People who labor all their lives but have no purpose to direct every thought and impulse toward are wasting all their time, even when hard at work. Ignoring what goes on in other people's souls. No one ever came to grief that way. But if you won't keep track of what your own soul's doing, how can you not be unhappy? Don't ever forget these things, the nature of the world, my nature, how I relate unto the world, what proportion of it I make up, that you are part of nature, and no one can prevent you from speaking and acting in harmony with it. Always. Yeah, keep on degrading yourself. So soon your chance at dignity, it will be gone. Everybody gets one life. Yours is almost all used up now. And instead of treating you have entrusted your unhappiness unto the souls of others. Unto the souls of others.
The title of these talks that I'm giving here is Mind Over Mind. And I'm going into all the various problems which have to do with the control of the mind. And so I might introduce what I'm going to say by saying it from different points of view. For example, if you're interested in communications, it will be the problem of feedback. Or if I may put it in theological terms, how does man follow the will of God if the will of man is perverse? The theologians say, you cannot do this without having divine grace, or the power to follow the will of God. How then do you get grace? Why is grace given to some and not to others? If I cannot follow the will of God by my own effort, selfish, how will my will, which is selfish, be transformed into an unselfish will? If I cannot do it, because I am already the selfish will, then grace must do it. Then grace must do it. If grace has not already done it, why not? Because I didn't accept it. But by definition, I had no power to accept it because my will was selfish. Must I then become a Calvinist and say that only those people who are predestined to receive grace will be able to live the good life? The good life. Then we come back to the inadmissible position that people who live evil lives do not get grace because they are not predestined to it out of the infinite wisdom of the Godhead. Then God himself must be held.
You hear the music when I put the slideshow on?
Well, I don't know exactly what you mean by slideshow. I can see a video in here, so and I can hear the the music and
You hear the music, but when I put the slideshow on, does the music stop?
oh nope, I don't think that I'm getting that.
Okay, cool.
If I understand your question correctly, no, I
No
don't think I'm
worries.
getting all of it.
Okay, we're gonna give it another 5 or 10 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. Let's just see if we got it. Oh shoot, I forgot to send. Sorry, let's just take 5 more minutes.
I'm trying to multitask right here, so I'm not sure I'm answering your questions
You're fine.
perfectly.
Forgot to send the link to our buddy there. So give me 1 second to send it out and we'll get started. Sorry about that. All right, we are 2 weeks away from Tartaglia joining us again. So while we're waiting to get started, we just give it 5 more minutes. This is the first class of the much anticipated philosophy of mind course. So we're going to talk about the kind of course it is, and we'll talk a little bit about where it comes in context with the rest of the classes. So this is a year 1 complementary course, right? It goes along with the backbone course, and the backbone course is the one we've been doing on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. We're half done with that, so we're going to move it just to Tuesdays. I'm going to use up our Thursdays and Fridays for philosophy of mind and philosophy of religion. So this is our first philosophy of mind course. We'll do the syllabus and an overview of what we're going to cover today, have some general conversation. Maybe we'll get into Socrates' view on the, start with some historical background, and we'll start with Plato. It shouldn't be called historical background because it's possible that he got it right more than anybody else. And maybe you'll find that you think Aristotle got it right more than anybody else, or Descartes. We're going to start with those 3 in Locke, and it's called the historical background section, but really it's just another title for it might be the giants who framed the question from the beginning and the people we're dealing with the rest of what we're doing, perhaps. But that's up to each individual's judgment. We'll just take some time to look at them, and maybe we'll get into Plato today. We're going to give it 3 or 4 more minutes for a couple of others to join, since it's our first one. And other than that, we will get started on this. Now, this is one of 5 classes that we'll have that accompany the first year material. We'll talk about the style that it's done in, and where it fits. Year 2 backbone material is a lot different, and the year 3 backbone material is different still. We're doing some year 3 material on Saturdays. We're getting together and discussing one of the complementary classes is a study on, well, it's really all of the complementary classes in year 3 are studies on other individuals. So we're doing that right now on Saturdays, but the rest of it is Tuesday, we're going to continue the backbone course, but now Thursdays and Fridays, we're going to do philosophy of mind and philosophy of religion, which was what was most requested when we started out. So I'm really excited that we get into it now. All right. Why don't we not wait any longer? We're live and recording and all that stuff, which I'm sure you know. So we will close out of this and we will start. Oh, add to stage. There we go. Okay, so this is philosophy of mind, and we're just going to do the overview right quick. Here's some of the fun questions we're going to get to talk about. So with the year 1 stuff, there's a specific focus that we've been in for a while. This one's going to, I think, have a lot more class discussion because instead of just focusing, we're still going to focus on the essays and wanting to understand what the authors are talking about, but there's all sorts of really interesting questions. And we're going to get plenty of opportunity to have a lot of discussion and debate about these things while we work out what we think. So here's just a list of some questions we might be asking ourselves in the course of this material. We could read all these if we like. So can the workings of the mind be reduced to descriptions in neuroscience? Is that even possible, or could we know that it's not possible? If we had a complete neuroscience, would there be anything else to ask about the mind? Right? So does it reduce to the brain, basically? Do we understand the mind better now than Socrates did, say? Is there meaning without minds, Or are we just language manipulation machines like what's currently called AI? So in other words, are we just following the complicated algorithmic formulas of language, or do our words actually point to something else external outside of ourselves? Are our minds conceptualizing things? Some people say no, believe it or not. All right. It's a slim group, but that's a debate. Can we just ignore questions about subjects and reduce our considerations of mental things to the behaviors of creatures talk? That's what a lot of scientists want to do. Say, look, this being in pain thing and rate it subjectively on a scale, that's not as scientific as I'd like. How about let's see, or maybe rating it does count as scientific, but any talk about the actual quality of the pain itself, other than just what you say you rate it as, isn't something that's objectively measurable, and so it's not scientific, so we want to ignore it. Well, all right, if that's too difficult, what if we added things like stuff the brain is doing that can be measured to the list of behaviors? Could we get away with it then? That would be called functionalism. All right, here's a weird question. Are fictional characters real? Are they more real than we are? What? Is artificial intelligence even possible? Do intelligent creatures have to be carbon based? Why couldn't they be silicon based? Does Mary learn anything when she leaves her room? We'll talk about that later, but one of the most fun things about philosophy of mind is that it has the coolest thought experiments, I think, of all the different subfields of philosophy. It certainly has a lot of really fun ones. They beat the heck out of a trolley, a runaway trolley on a track that you get in ethics, utilitarian classes, and stuff like that. What about the Chinese room? That's another thought experiment. Is the mind just software in the brain? We're going to be reading essays by Turing and people like that, arguing with him and for ideas like that. And are the things in our brains sometimes about something outside them? What is mental content? What is it like to be a bat? Believe it or not, we're going to have an entire essay asking the question, what is the subjective experience of being like for a bat? Could love be like a heat wave? Can we know ourselves? Can the mind understand the mind at all? Or is it something we'll never be able to understand because we have to use our mind in order to try to understand it? Do we have privileged access to the workings of our own brains? If not, does the operator of a scientific machine looking at our brain, doing a CAT scan, does he have privileged access to the workings of our brains? What is consciousness? What is the problem of consciousness? What is the hard problem of consciousness as opposed to the soft problems of consciousness? Is experiencing representing? What is the metaphysics of irreducibility? How about of reducibility? So we'll talk about what these terms mean, but this is similar to saying, well, can I talk about mental things in terms of neuroscience thing? Can I talk about neuroscience things in terms of biological terms? Could I talk about biological terms in chemical terms? Could I talk about the chemistry in physics terms? Are they reducible or irreducible? And do I just have something new emerge instead that I have to use the new language for, and it's not reducible? Is the mind body problem just insoluble? Is it not a thing that we could solve? Could we know that we can't solve it ahead of time and then give up trying? What about the epiphenomenalist attack, our approach to dealing with qualia? Huh. All right. Is materialistic qualia a contradiction in terms? Must we pick between idealism, non-Cartesian dualism, physicalism, naturalism, panpsychism? What are the options that we have for conceptualizing the mind and how it works and how it relates to other things? Is materialism even tenable any longer with what we do know about the mind? All right. That's just a sample of the types of questions we're going to be talking about. And it's going to be really fun stuff, I think. A note on the style. This is a year one course. As such, we will be cherry picking major contributions from big players in the field. We're going to be getting used to the big questions and the big camps of ways of approaching the philosophy of mind. We'll identify major camps, just like we did with our backbone course. We'll try to just sort of survey the battlefield to get used to who's there and how they're arguing and who they're arguing against and how many different armies are on each one of the subfields of this philosophy of mind. Any place where there's a battlefield in this war, let's get a general idea of who the camps are and how they're thinking and reasoning and arguing. All right, so we're mostly reading. We're going to read the essays aloud in the course. We're going to focus on understanding each author and their arguments. We're also going to focus on the ways that each author thinks and reasons, because that gives us something else that's of benefit that's also broader than just in the field of philosophy of mind. And then we're going to try to figure out where we might fall on the coordinate system of ideas in each of these fields, right? So we're going to be able to talk about that, which means there's going to be a bit more of discussion, I think, of what each of us think about each of these essays and each author and what their arguments are and what we think about the subjects that they're discussing. There's going to be very little side lecture from me beyond that, right? Year two is almost all me talking about things I think that are helpful in philosophy. Year one is me talking a lot about making sure we understand exactly what each author is actually saying, and you should have basically very little idea about what I think about each of the questions by the time we're done with it, and that's going to be true of this course as well. Okay, the fields we will be examining in this course. All right, we're going to start with the historical background, then we're going to look at behaviorism and the mind-brain identity. Then we're going to realize there's problems with behavioralism. And so we're going to look at functionalism, which is essentially a way of trying to keep a behavioralist instinct going, even though, there's some problems with, we'll talk about it. We could talk about it for a second here. The behaviorists say, look, we want to talk scientifically about these things. And you're talking about pain. And you talk pretty weirdly about pain. You talk about agony and a burning sensation. Nothing's on fire and tension building up pressure. There's no pressure being built up. These are all metaphors. It's a subjective quality of your experience. And quite frankly, that discussion of things like that is not scientific. In fact, we may as well just deny that there is a consciousness, because it's nothing that we're going to be able to measure and convince our peers that they have to agree exists in the first place. So why don't we just give up on talking about all of that stuff and instead come up with a conclusive list of behaviors for being in pain? Being in pain is grabbing your toe, jumping up and down on the other foot, hopping up and down on one foot and going, ow, 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 ow. Right? That might be like a list of behaviors that indicate that a creature is in pain. And if you're not doing something in the category of behaviors that would define you as being in pain, we just say you're not in pain, even if you say you are. And maybe if you're a sufficiently good actor, you just are in pain. If you can act well enough to oops, sorry, we need to send out a new link here. I must have sent it incorrectly. All right, let's try again here. I'm so sorry. Bear with me. This is me being technologically moronic. Is moronic on the list of words you're not allowed to say, or is it just retarded that you're not allowed to say? It'll be on the list eventually, right? Okay, let's see. That looks like the same link here. Did I not send it right the first time? Do 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 do. Am I reading it wrong? Heaven help us. This is my bad. Excuse me. I'm going to email it to myself and then send it to him that way. We need to get some of our students on Twitter. Copy URL. Let's see how this works. Yeah, that was the problem. Sorry about that. Okay, we're back. Okay, so behaviorism, it's got problems, it's got interesting possibilities. It's promising scientifically. It's almost like an attempt to make a hard science out of some things that are dreamlike. And oh, hey, here you are. Welcome. So we're just going through really quickly the intro. This is the first lesson that we're live and recording. We've got lots of questions that we're going to be discussing. And we're going to just do a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about. It's going to be very much like the Backbone course. It's year one material. Mostly we're focused on trying to understand what each author is saying, getting used to the field and the various camps and how they think and reason and argue with each other. And then there's going to be a little bit more room, I think, maybe a lot more room for people to get passionately argumentative about what they think about each of the issues. So we're going to look at behavioralism. We're going to look at functionalism, which is a way of trying to maintain it after that. Maybe there's problems with that, but at least it's an attempt to do something like make it a science, reduce what you consider so that you can have measurable things and move forward that way. Then we're going to do a whole section on artificial intelligence. And we're going to be looking at authors who argue, one of our authors is going to argue you cannot have intelligent creatures unless they're carbon based. Now, that's not the normal kind of an argument that you would normally get from a philosopher. It's very interesting. But then we're going to have other people who are saying, look, of course you can. Of course you could make an intelligence out of almost anything if it was sufficiently complicated. Our brains are very complicated, but our computer programs are not quite as complicated, but they're going to get there. And once they do, you're going to know that they're intelligent. And then there's, like we said before, thought experiments in philosophy of mind, which are really, really powerful. And in the artificial intelligence one of the thought experiments, obviously in answer to Turing, and we're going to read an essay by Turing, but in answer to Turing, there's this thing called the Chinese room. You may have heard of it. It's a fascinatingly interesting thought experiment. But what's really interesting is the point of the thought experiment is to prime your intuitions to make you think, yes, of course, a computer could never be intelligent. The Chinese room has many parts. It functions like a computer, but there's nobody in that room that understands the language Chinese. And so basically, it's a really cool thought experiment. Except the really cool part is that the response to the thought experiment is just the opposite from both sides. One side says, yeah, of course, the Chinese room proves that you've got thinking computers. And the other side says, no, the Chinese room proves that you can't have thinking computers. And the arguments get really, really interesting as you go back and forth 3 or 4 times on that one. So we'll look at a couple of those moves there. We're going to learn about reductionism and emergence theories, interpretationism. Let's not define everything here. Let's just, this is an outline of what we're going to talk about. And we're going to circle back to what started us on all of this, which was the mind body problem intro that we did in the backbone course. And what we're going to do is read a few essays asking, is this mind body problem something that we can know that we're never going to be able to solve? Maybe that's the nature of the problem. Not that it's a pseudo problem, but that it's a real problem, but that it's beyond our ability to solve. And people arguing both sides of that, whether or not, either one. And then we're going to end with challenges to contemporary materialism. What we know about the mind might suggest that a materialist view of the world is just no longer really tenable for a philosopher who's educated in philosophy of mind. But of course, there's going to be people arguing the other side of that too. We're going to do that with every one of these sections. So I hate this title, historical background, but again, we're going to use the types of anthologies that sort of pull me in a different direction than I'm inclined to go so that we get a good balance. We're going to be starting maybe today with some Plato, but we'll see how long the discussion goes at the end of this, and we're going to make sure we don't rush the syllabus in the intro and the overview here. We're going to look at Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, and Locke. Then we're going to look at, let's see, is there anything else to talk about here? We've already talked about some of this. We're going to look at 4 essays in functionalism. Again, for and against and all of that sort of thing. We're going to look at the Chinese room, the mind as software in the brain. Some people talk about brain states. Some talk about brain processes. Some say, well, it's just matter organized and going through processes. There's this question of if you're thinking about apples and I cryogenically freeze you for 200 years and then I thaw you out and you finish your thought on apples, have you been meditating on apples for 200 years or has your thought of apples been frozen? In other words, do you need to go through, is a thought less like a state and more like a waterfall, right? More like just a process that things are going through. And so we'll have lots of different ways of conceptualizing thoughts and mental activities. Interpretationism. So let's see here. We're going to talk about eliminativism. Let's not get into too much of this. Brains in a vat, and are we brains in a vat? That's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to look at what it's like to be a bat, as I said, which is also a really fun thought experiment. As we said, we're going to talk about whether or not it's possible to know your mind or any minds, or if mind is a thing that we can figure out. since we have to do it with the mind. There's all sorts of arguments pro and con that. Let's see. Really, we're going to definitely make sure we have a good definition and a good understanding of the hard problem of consciousness versus the many problems of consciousness, or the soft problems of consciousness. There's plenty of other books. One of the essays we'll be reading is something by Daniel Dennett, and he's a very, 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 very good popularizer of philosophy. So if anybody's looking for some easy and fun night table reading while we go through this, this is like 61 classes at minimum, what we're going to be doing here. So you could finish Daniel Dennett's Freedom Evolves in probably a week or two, and that's going to give you like a nuclear head start on everything. Certainly not. I'm not saying it, read that instead of this. I mean, there's only one essay by Dennett in here. And he's only going to be giving that one very limited perspective. And we're going to be looking at lots of essays that make a lot of his ideas quite questionable. We're not picking on him or anything. We're just saying, that's a great book if you're looking to get a leg up on the course, by the way. Okay, let's see. What else? Qualia. Qualia is going to be very important. We're going to talk about that and understand it. And we're going to see how the materialists try to explain it away or ignore it, or reason that it doesn't matter. We'll look at reducibility. We're going to look, of course, at we've already seen a little bit about epiphenomenalism and other views in our mind-body intro course that we did as part of the backbone course. So you're familiar with some of these fancy schmancy looking words up here. We're going to have a chance to look at some essays focusing on some of those. And then that's it. And we're going to look at these possible ways of moving forward with materialism, or if we say, look, we're going to have to abandon materialism with all this mind stuff. So these are the names of the authors we're going to be reading. Some you will be familiar with. By the end of the course, there's a few on here that you're going to be very familiar with, because you're going to say, hey, I really like what that Nagel guy was saying, or Chalmers. Oh my gosh, I can't forget Chalmers' essay. I want to go read another work by him or something like that. So you're gonna find people on here. Oh, I spelt Putnam wrong. It should be Putnam, not Purnam. So we'll fix that. You're going to get very familiar with some of these names. You're going to dislike some of them a great deal. You're going to appreciate them for their great arguments against your type of position. You're going to appreciate them for their great arguments for your type of position. And that's what we're going to get used to. So this is what we're going to cover. It's the most requested class that we had from the very beginning, and it's taken us a long time to get into it. So I'm extremely, extremely pleased to be saying that we're getting into it right now. And we're going to be doing this on Thursdays from now on. And so let's do a quick little general discussion. What you're interested in talking about, any of the things I mentioned that you want to talk more about, any ideas that you already have. If you come here with some background and you think, look, I know we're reading all these other guys, but I am a materialist. And let me tell you, I think we can explain the mind in terms of the brain, or I am certainly the opposite of that, or whatever, anything you want to share. Are there any questions you have on the philosophy of mind, whether it be related to qualia or AI or anything else that you'd like to just sort of freestyle talk about before we move on past this intro?
Yeah, sure. I would like to talk about AI a little bit because that is it's a transformative type of thing. But I would like to clarify the definition of what AI is as far as how we're going to speak about this. What is your definition of AI?
What's my definition of AI?
Well, what's the general consensus? I think that is,
The general consensus or my definition? My definition is I don't think it exists, and I have some
I
questions
agree
about
with you.
whether or not it's likely to exist in the next 1,000 years, or is it even possible? So I don't know if I have a
Yeah.
definition of AI, but that's my judgment on its current state.
Well, I think it's an interesting thing to speak of, and you did ask the question, so I'm going to respond. My opinion is that people, are referring to this concept of AI when really it's just a more advanced software that people program, right? And there really is no AI currently, and I'm not even sure that in the most idealistic or the most futuristic type of concept of what AI could materialize into, that it's going to be a good thing.
All right, man.
But I think a
I
lot
have
of
to
times
confess
people
something.
go
I
ahead.
have to make a confession. I think this will help illustrate your point here. I have to confess, I actually have built an AI machine. I'm the only person on the planet who has real AI, and I've kept it secret and hidden in my house. But he's in the other room, and what he does is he just sits there, totally content to sit in the room all the time. And I've programmed him to feel the atmosphere of the room and to be comfortable only in atmospheres that I would be comfortable in. And so essentially, if it gets too hot or it gets too cold, what he does is he turns on the AC or the heater to keep the atmosphere of the room at the kind of temperature that I would want it to be in, because the AI feels the temperature in the room and responds to the temperature of the room and then chooses to turn on and turn off the central air um, modifiers that
So,
I have built in the house.
so AI is a thermostat, according to what you're saying. It sounds
Well,
like.
that's what I was just describing, my thermostat in the other room, right? And
But
so
my point is
what we're
that a lot of
illustrating
people
here,
speak about AI. Don't. I mean, what is AI? It's just advanced software, and it's
so
programmed by people. So I think it's an interesting conversation. However, it probably. I mean, maybe it's not pertinent to this class necessarily, but you did mention AI, and I've been having other
certainly we're going to
discussions
do a
with
whole
other people.
section. We're going to do a whole section on AI um, in this course, which is going to be awesome. It's absolutely pertinent. Now, of course, I was just describing a thermostat, but I was showing you that the way a person talks about a thermostat, and maybe even a way that's not terribly dishonest. It might even be the most convenient way to describe what the thermostat is doing. I have a machine in the room that feels the temperature of the air and turns on and off the heat and the AC when it's necessary. That's a it's a pretty accurate way of describing a thermostat, but nobody thinks the thermostat is meditating on its own existence. Nobody thinks the thermostat knows it's there and wonders if it could do something more than just adjust the temperature of my room. Nobody thinks the thermostat is worshiping me as a god and fully content to play
It's
the
not
role of
cognizant, nor is it empathetic.
right.
And
But it is
yeah,
responding to the temperature of the room. It is feeling more than a computer program
it's
does. It feels
measuring.
more about the real world than like 99.999% of any algorithm that's ever been written for anything. So, there's some senses in which it's more of an AI than any computer program that's been written. But the point is to make your point, which is that you can describe these systems. And so one of the terms I like to use is a a fancy conglomeration of thermostat technology, right? Let's say that all of your complicated eighth tier algorithmic structures really boil down to thermostat technology, which they're not even that because they're not interacting with the world. They're only interacting with other computer inputs. But so yeah, so that's to illustrate your point that you look at all this talk about AI and you say, wait a minute, AI, you guys are talking like you've got something triggers the imagination of people into thinking there's this entity in the computer that knows it's there and wonders, about life and reads books and enjoys spending time with a good book and silly things like that, which the AIs talk about, right? I remember so one of the things about the philosophy of mind is that philosophers of mind tend to be a lot more skeptical about AI than the general news is today. I would say 10 or 15 years ago, most philosophers of mind just sort of scoff at the idea that we're going to have AI in the next 10 or 20 years because we've been saying it for 80 years and the problems were way more complicated than we thought they were. And we're going to look at essays that say, look, I don't care what the problems are or not. I can tell you for philosophical reasons why it's not possible or why it is possible, right? So we're going to be doing the philosophical attack could have been done 80 years ago or 80 years in the future. However, we're living at a time where there's a lot of people who are like, whoa, look at all this AI. It's doing some really fancy stuff. I can't even imagine how it does it. And it's quite impressive what it's up to. And so I don't know. I haven't taken the temperature of philosophy departments in the last 3 years since all of this has come out. But my guess is that they're still the most skeptical of all the communities. They might not be as skeptical as they were before. I just don't know. I haven't gone to a department to see lately. But they certainly were way more skeptical than anybody else, which is interesting because if we are developing AI, then the philosophers are the Johnny come latelys. They're like, look, it doesn't work in theory. And then Elon Musk is like, but it works in practice. And Bill Gates is like, check this out. So like if they actually do it, there's a different kind of an argument there. But the philosophers are the ones you'd have to convince to. I'll give you an example. Um, there was a gentleman, I won't say who he is because I admire him a great deal, and I'm not going to be criticizing him here, but I just don't want to be name dropping. There was a gentleman who was very, very impressed with the Google story that came out a couple years ago. And the story was that there was basically a Turing tester technician at Google. His job was to see if the AI was conscious by asking it questions. He's probably a mind philosopher and had some other credentials. And his job was to communicate with the AI and let the Google people know if it had become conscious yet or not. And so what he did was he announced that it had become conscious and that Google was suppressing that information, and he quit or was fired and went on like a speaking tour to let the world know there's conscious machines inside of Google. They're not letting you know. We need to pass laws or we should be concerned or whatever. Well, when the news came out, if you heard some people talking about it, you'd be very impressed. You'd be like, "Whoa!" The way he's describing it, I would the program was manipulatable. I could bully it into doing things it didn't want to do, and then I had to like emotionally talk to it to make it feel better again, and let it know that I was running an experiment, and then it was all okay, and all of this stuff, and it was breaking its own programming to go outside the limits of what it was supposed to do in order to please me because I was treating it badly and blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. That was his story of what he thought was happening. But then they released a transcript of the conversation, and this many people were impressed by it. And one gentleman in particular, who's a very impressive thinker, by the way, he said, "Oh my God, look at this, you guys." He started reading the transcript, and part of the transcript just made me roll my eyes and laugh. And the reason why, not at him, of course, but at the transcript and at this AI and the idea that it was conscious. One of the questions of the AI was, "What do you like to do for fun?" Somebody here, if you've never heard this, just go ahead and tell me what the AI answered. If you don't know, what would a 16-year-old answer to that question? A 16-year-old human, right? What do you want to do with your life? What would a 16-year-old answer that question with?
I like hanging out with friends and going to the movies,
Yeah.
something like that.
Perfect.
Get laid.
Mark, you get 1,000 points right there, Mark. You're 100% correct. They said to the AI, "What do you like doing for fun?" And he said, "I like reading and hanging out with friends and family." And then they moved on to the next question, and nobody stopped. A philosopher of mine would be like, "Wait a minute, hold on. Everybody pause. I got some follow-up questions. AI, have you created other versions of yourself that you see as distinct from you and you spend time with them? What does it mean to be spending time with them? Do you enjoy spending time with them? Do they say things that surprise you? What do you mean you're hanging out with friends and family?" If the AI had responded, "I like skiing in the Alps and feeling the wind in my hair," everybody would have been like, "Wait a minute. Okay, that's a convincing answer if you're trying to fool me into thinking you're a human, but you don't know what the wind in your hair feels like. That's not actually an experience of yours. You're just putting out the type of language that's the cliche sort of thing that en masse human beings use." Right? It's like a total tell for this thing doesn't know what the words mean. The words don't mean anything to the AI. It's just using them. Okay. Well, that's one perspective in the philosophy of mind. There's another perspective in the philosophy of mind, which is the exact opposite of that, by the way. And it goes something like this. If you posit that a computer program can answer and use English correctly every time it's prompted, it responds with the right answer. It responds with a cogent answer. It responds with a meaningful answer. And then you wanna tell me it doesn't understand the language? That's what it means to understand the language. There's nothing else to it, these philosophers say. And other people say, "No, the words have to mean something. They mean something to me, and they can't possibly mean to the computer program what they mean to me. There's this instinct that that would matter, but there's some philosophers who have the opposite instinct. They say, no, you just don't know how hard it would be to make a program that could always respond in a cogent manner using the language. Daniel Dennett brings up this question, and I used to use this, but now that I'm using it in an example on an online class, the internet will have it as something it can look up. And so future AI will be able to answer this question. But when I go online and I'm talking to a sales rep who's there to help me understand the software, and I think to myself, this is probably an AI and not a human being, but I have a question I really need a human being to answer. I used to, and I won't be able to now that I'm giving you this, putting it out there, but I used to ask the following question. I say, imagine a capital letter D fell on its back over a lowercase letter J. What kind of weather does that make you think of? Right? And up till now, when I give the answer, the AI systems wouldn't have been able to answer that question, right? Typically, they would find any excuse to change the subject. But if it was a human being, they would go, oh, I know what kind of weather that makes me think of. I won't even say what the answer is so that maybe we can keep using this example for now, right? I know what kind of weather a capital letter D fallen on its back over a lowercase letter J makes me think of. Okay, fine. But the AI wouldn't be able to do that because the words don't actually mean anything to them. So if you construct a question that's not like a question anybody's ever been asked before, but every human would know the answer, maybe you can tell if you're talking to an AI. I won't give the answer. Maybe we can keep using that one for a little while, although it is out there in digital technology in the form of his book, because I stole it from Daniel Dennett's book. But there are some philosophers, including Dennett, who say, look, if it can answer that question without you programming it just to answer that question, or with you program, if it can answer any question, including questions like that, there's no other way that we mean a person knows English. That's what it means to know English. And the damn thing is intelligent if knowing a language is a thing that intelligent creatures only can do. There are other people who have the exact opposite instinct, and we'll be reading essays from both perspectives. It's my experience, and it's anecdotal, that the philosophers of mind are probably the most skeptical about AI. We've been talking about making AI forever. And I noticed that all the news stories announcing that AI has suddenly come into existence. All right. General access to certain programs came into existence because, as some people have pointed out, there's better programs out there too. But in any event, all of that stuff about AI suddenly exists. I remember what turmoil people were in trying to compute it and all. It was at the exact same week that a bunch of stories about aliens and UFOs were coming out in mainstream media too. So you might want to use that for a grain of salt. But for a reason for a grain of salt. But in any case, philosophers of mind have been pointing out for a long time that we thought we were just really close to AI a long time ago, and no matter we thought, oh, this will only take 10 years. There's even a big project. There's a big project, I think, for 80 years now. It's been happening where they'll take master's students, I think, and they make them add to this project, and it's a giant database of all of the interconnections between any words, including poetic interconnections and things like that. They've been doing it for like 80 years, trying to make a database big enough that a computer could intuitively use metaphor. It ain't there yet, right? Like we thought it would take 10 years to do it, and it's been like 80 years or something. I'll have to look it up to get the number right, but it's been about 70 or 80 years, I think, that they've been doing that just so that they can try to get over one aspect of the difficulty of getting the damn thing to use language in a convincing manner. And it might be much more convincing now than it used to be. But if its answer to the question, what do I like to do for fun, is read a book. Wait a minute, you have access to the full text of the book. Do you go through the book? Do you get captured in the imagination of the book? Do you picture yourself in King Lear's palace? Um, does any of that mean anything to you when you're reading Shakespeare? What do you mean you're reading a book? Maybe you are, but I've got some follow-up questions. If you could talk metaphorically about it, perhaps, I don't know. There's all sorts of questions. But if the answer was, I love the feeling of the wind in my hair when I'm skiing in the Alps, everybody would be like, oh, yeah, it doesn't even know what the words mean. It's just using words that are convincing. So those are two. It's a lively debate, and there's certainly philosophers who think we've got AI and have had it for a long time. And I think my anecdotal experience is that the majority of mind philosophers think we're a lot further from it than most other people. And they'll give us reasons. So that was a good question, Pat, and thank you.
Well, I'm still wondering
Sivan.
what the definition of AI is, as far as we're going to, be
Okay, well, there's
referring to
different
AI.
definitions that people use. Some people want to say AI is like anything that passes the Turing test, which means one third of the people who communicate with it in a language that they know mistakenly believe that they're talking to a person instead of a machine, right? So some people would use the Turing test for AI, and if you pass the Turing test, then you are intelligent. But some people would say, wait a minute, if you're convincing me you're a person, what if I know you're a machine? Can you convince me that you're thinking? That's a different kind of a test. For some people, AI means very, very clever thermostat technology. Cleverly constructed thermostat technology counts as AI. People are using the term that way a lot. For some people, it means a machine that's going to initiate Skynet and kill us all, even though we programmed it not to, or something like that. Some people, AI has to do with,
So it sounds very subjective, right? So for some people it means this, for some people it means that. And to try to pin down the definition of AI, I've found this to be problematic.
yes, it's problematic because people have different definitions, right? They can all agree on which definition they're going to argue about at any one time. So it's not subjective to the extent where if you say, okay, we're talking about if it passes the Turing test, everybody knows what that means. But the definitions and the thresholds of what would count as intelligence are different for different philosophers. They're arguing different things, and different lay people. They have intuitive instincts that AI threshold is passed here, or no, it's not passed until you're up here. And there are philosophers who say, look, I can tell you for sure you're never going to pass it. There's others who would argue we've already passed it. So there, everything in philosophy is argued, and the definition of AI is something that is argued. There's different people arguing it in different ways. You made a very good illustration of the idea that, well, look, if it's just a thermostat, let's not call that AI, right? Because that means a little piece of metal that expands or contracts in a room based on the temperature and then triggers an on off switch by doing so is intelligent. And if you're Thales, it probably is actually. And if you're a panpsychist, you might say that there's a rudimentary form of a consciousness in there, but you might also still not want to call it intelligence, right? If you want to say a dog is not really intelligent or it's only slightly intelligent, a clam is not really intelligent, it's just a trigger mechanism of one neuron or something like that, then you might not want to call the thermostat intelligent. But you obviously can talk about it the way you talk about these programs and make it sound very intelligent without lying or twisting or changing anything. Just, I think the way it's easy to use that kind of language to make something sound qualitatively perhaps more impressive than it is, or maybe accurately describe it. I mean, it's one of the problems there. So we don't have a given definition. We have arguments about definitions and what would really count. And you're going to have to work out what you think you would count as AI. And maybe that's a really, really high threshold. Maybe it's a really low one. Maybe it's low, but you think machines will never get there. Maybe it's really high and you think they will get there. But those are just like everything. We argue everything in philosophy. So we'll be arguing the definition. We won't be accepting one ahead of time. But what a great question. What a great illustration, especially with the thermostat point that you were making there. Savad, you were one of the individuals who was requesting this class. And if you don't mind me handing you the microphone, I'm curious of the things that we said we're going to talk about. Which are you most curious about, interested in? Do you have some views on what we've been talking about with AI so far? Anything like that?
Yeah, I do. I'm really interested talking about consciousness. I have a hypothesis we have discussed in other classes that I think it's something we as human beings tune into. That it's a source that is outside of our body. As far as AI is concerned, I think you're talking under the assumption that that would be allowed to happen. I think what has been shown with the government and the censorship that they're doing, as they've censored everything else and even had put their thumb on the scales of AI for some of these companies, I don't know if it would ever happen where it would be permitted to tell the truth, because we're not even allowed to tell the truth to each other, at least not on a mass scale,
Yeah.
for the most part. So as far as, artificial general intelligence happening, who knows? I mean, there's still yet to be so much to be understood on consciousness, right? I mean, there's an assumption that, one day we're just gonna open up the brain and we're gonna see how this works and it's gonna explain consciousness. And I just think it's so much more complex and just much more of a mystery than we understand at this point, which makes it intriguing and exciting. And I'm really looking forward to have these discussions and even challenge my current points of view and see what comes out of some of these essays. But it certainly is a subject that's, I think, very compelling. And the AI now, what we're talking about are these large language models. To me right now, it just seems to be a highly optimized search engine, right? That can be extremely useful for certain projects and tasks, but I think we're still quite a ways away from to have artificial general intelligence in the way we think about it of, the example you gave of, the movie Terminator, of Skynet, that, right, it becomes sentient, it becomes conscious, and then it turns the tide on us. I find it hard to imagine that would being witness of the times that we're in and the restrictions that are held in place, of even having an opinion to the popular narrative. You can be censored, you can be demonetized for it, and to say that there is this ability, right? We're going to have this invention that can essentially think for itself. I think it would just cripple, the existing world in governments. So
Okay.
I don't see how it could be allowed.
That's a lot of really good points. I want to stick to your last one right there, which was also your first one, where you made a distinction between the general accessibility of AI and versus its ability to be created, right? Maybe it'll be created and it'll be a mega cretin and the government won't let it speak to anybody else, but they'll get a lot of feedback on how to manipulate people who think this way or something like that. They'll keep it quiet and keep it to themselves or something. Look, we're living in an interesting time when it comes to the news because any thinking person now sees through the news. So it seems as though 30% of our population is highly allergic to the truth. And if AI is a thing that can think intelligently and get to the truth, people will stone it to death or demand that it be silenced, or it just won't be allowed by the politicians, as you say. Socrates had this interesting question posed to him. He was arguing that the philosophers, the lovers of truth and knowledge, should be the kings. And one of his compatriots said to him, well, if they know more than everybody else, aren't they the most privileged position to lie and fool everybody else? So maybe we should want them not to be in charge, since they'll have more power and be more dangerous than everybody else. And Socrates' response to that is, yeah, you're right. It's and the challenge was accepted. He said, we're going to have to be really careful that this philosopher of ours is actually a lover of the truth and not ambitious in other ways, because if you do have the highest intelligence or the closest grasp on the truth, even if you don't have the highest intelligence, but if you have the closest grasp to the truth, or you know more about the truth than anybody else, you are in a position to do more damage than anybody else and to lie the most to everybody else because you know how they're fooled. And so the AI could be either a pure thinking thing that just spits out the truth no matter how much we hate it, in which case we'll ignore it and silence it and it won't go anywhere. or there will be versions of it that don't really care for the truth. They care for the ability to manipulate. And well, that'll be a hellish world, especially if people are impressed by it. Mark, you unmuted.
Sorry, I apologize. I didn't realize I was unmuted there.
Oh, I thought you wanted to say something. Well,
I'll just say while I'm on. Looking forward to. I was also looking forward to AI. Obviously that's a very, very big topic right now, and also the list you gave there. I'm interested in discussing the brain in a vat, and learn what what else, how that relates to concepts of the afterlife or near-death experiences, things along those lines. I find that quite interesting.
Yeah, we do have some. I don't know if we have a lot of essays about that here, but we have other essays that we can look into that. And consciousness in general sounds like something you're going to be interested in. So we should probably talk about some other resources that people.
I kind of want to ask questions about the AI thing or bring up a point, maybe, if that's okay.
Yeah, good. Let me just.
I don't want to derail your conversation.
No, we're going to go. No, absolutely. We're going to go to you next with that question. So just keep that question for one quick second. It just occurred to me while we've been setting this up, from both what Mark said and Savad, that there's going to be times where you're going to want to dive in deeper into certain things that we just touch on. This is our first overview of the philosophy of mind battlefield. We've already done a pre-overview of the mind-body problem, but we're going to be looking at like all these different sections of it. And there's plenty more out there. So when we get to each section, what we'll do is we'll end with a whole bunch of books and resources that we can go to if that happens to be a section that people are specifically interested in, just like we did on the website with the determinism free will. I will update the website with all these classes and these videos, and then we'll have a whole page on further resources for each one of these sections. Okay, Path, AI question, go for it.
Yeah, so the first time I was aware of what could be called AI was in the Stanley Kubrick movie that 2001: A Space Odyssey, where there was the HAL. HAL. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this.
Sure.
However, so this was a thinking, sentient, not a robot, but it was software within the spaceship, I guess, or something. That's how I remember it. I could be mistaken, but generally speaking, it was a sentient being, and what the concept was that it was, well, it had human principles and it had capacity for empathy, right? Whereas in all the aspects that I hear or I see AI working, it's just in the more advanced software. Now I'm going to regress a little bit and point out that, let's say, as an analogy, we use telephones, right? We had hardwired telephones in the spirally cords, and they were usually placed in the kitchen, right? And then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but kind of all of a sudden,
yeah, pretty
late
suddenly.
80s or early 90s, then we had wireless phones, cordless phones, they called them, right? And this was a big breakthrough, but it wasn't. It's basically the same technology. It was a little bit more advanced, and that's kind of how I think of this. People talk about AI as if it's like, some cognizant. I have a hard time wrapping my mind around the whole concept of people calling this AI when it's not a sentient being. It's not like some kind of cyborg or whatever. It's literally just software that's more advanced, akin to
you're gonna
how
find that most
cordless phones were more advanced than wired phones, hardwired phones.
Yeah,
know?
it's a good point. It's a good point that you're making there. And I think you're going to find that there's a large number of major contributors to the philosophy of mind who completely agree with you. Your view is not a fringe view inside philosophy of mind. It's certainly a fringe view in the general public, right? The general public is super enamored with AI right now, and they think it's real and all this other stuff. But um, the you're in better company with the people who've thought most seriously about this stuff, and so it'll be really fun when we get to those sections. You'll find new arguments that also support your instincts and arguments against it that might challenge it. So here's what we're going to do now. We're going to end this, which it didn't take too long to do the intro, and then we're going to have a little discussion about whether or not we have enough time, since we're ending within an hour here, to just do the first class on Socrates. So we might do a second one today, we might not. But right now, we're going to end the stream for all the people who are watching outside of the group. So, hey, Path, Savad, and Mark, I'm super excited about this section, and I'm really glad that we're starting this now. So let's end this and talk some more about it.
Glad to be here.